Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Megan. This is my house at Old Town Alexandria. Come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Megan Beyer. My most recent job was working for the United States State Department as the Director of Art and Embassies, curating the art that makes U.S. Embassy residences a home. Welcome to my home in Alexandria, Virginia. So the way I ended up with this house was a complete surprise to me. And I came home. My husband was ambassador in Switzerland at the time, and we came home for an Easter break, so it was beautiful April weather. And a friend of mine was looking for a home in Old Town Alexandria, and we looked at this house, and she didn't want it. And I kept saying, "Oh, do we have to leave? I want to, keep looking at this house." And I just fell in love with it. And long story short, we ended up buying this house and beginning the journey of sort of redecorating this house and bringing so much of what I learned and experienced in Switzerland to this home. We worked very hard for the Barack Obama presidential campaign, and it was very much a surprise to us when President Obama called my husband, and he wouldn't tell us which country, but he asked if we would be willing to serve in Switzerland because he knew we had children, and he knew that was a family decision because he had a family himself. And so we wanted to know, of course, what country are we talking about that could enter into the decision. And he said, just if you like lederhosen, and I know you like mountain climbing and chocolates, that's all I can tell you. So, we still weren't quite sure, but we agreed to do it. So that began a 4-year term from 2009 until 2013. My husband had been lieutenant governor, had run for governor of Virginia, but had never served in a diplomatic role. So it was just a brand new adventure for all of us. And we lived in a beautiful, beautiful, what was more of a French-looking chateau in a German canton of Switzerland called Bern. That is the capital of Switzerland. It was a very magical experience, representing America at a very critical time, pivoting on policies having to do with the environment and in the banking industry. And my husband's background in business was very helpful with that. And you really did feel like you were serving your country. And I did a lot of things with cultural diplomacy. So working with the Montreux Jazz Festival, the Locarno Film Festival, we brought Quincy Jones in for our National Day celebration, did some things with Gina Davis on gender equality, and reminded the Swiss of all the things they love about American culture. So in the historic district of Old Town Alexandria, it's very rare to find a house that has windows on all sides looking into this room. I used to walk down the street as a young girl and look in this living room and think, I cannot believe I can see windows on every side of that room. And so I call this my windfall light room. But if we want to close this off, these are historic shutters that we've kept, and we can have a little more privacy that way. But one of the things I love about this room is that it has so many memories for me of things that we've done, places that we've gone. This particular sculpture is by a Colombian artist named Maria Echavez, and I saw it at an auction upon our return from a congressional delegation trip to the Northern Triangle. And we'd been in Colombia and learned about the plight of young women in the rural parts of the country. And I think it was because of that, but I just had such a strong connection with this sculpture. And I was very fortunate to be able to get it. And I love having it here in this room. And the lightness and the airiness is, something that I was very attracted to in the homes in Europe, where you had these big, foreboding-looking historic homes. But when you'd walk in, they would have this great relief of light. So I've really gone with that in this particular room.
So over here I have a set of Hogarth prints. It's called Marriage a la Mode. I gave them to my husband the second year of our marriage. And, Hogarth is known for his humor. And it's the story of an arranged marriage that goes south. So, luckily I've been married many years now. And the second year of the marriage, we weren't sure it might end up like that it ended up pretty well. We've done many adventures together.
This piece is clearly a European piece, but we picked it up in Charlottesville. I do a lot of traveling in throughout Virginia, and my husband was lieutenant governor for 8 years and ran for governor. So we have traveled every inch of Virginia, so we like to have Virginia moments. These were from Switzerland.
So, I am Irish, so we do like to have our bar. What this evokes for me is my family, because a lot of these are pieces from my father's bar. He won in a golf tournament. And so when I come over here, I think of Daddy, which I think he would enjoy. And then here's my father's flask that might be the reason he won that golf tournament, because it's his golfing flask. So I never knew he had till he died, and we found it, and it made a lot of sense.
These chairs are Louis XVI, and we actually used them in our residence in Switzerland. I purchased them in Switzerland. I brought them home. So that always reminds me of our tour of duty in Bern, Switzerland. We call it dining for your country. It wasn't the hardest post, but I think we made a lot of progress at that time. And then this is a piece I never would have thought to put in this room, but my fantastic designer, Bobbi Smith, who's also a very good friend of mine, told me how important it would be to have a contemporary piece, a heavy piece, and I just love it. And on this table are cojibas from Cuba that I got directly from the ambassador in the United States representing Cuba upon the celebration of this wonderful bilateral agreement we ended up signing right after President Obama opened up Cuba, opened the hand of friendship to the Cuban people. He sent me, when I was working as director of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, with Usher, Smokey Robinson, Dave Matthews, just a plane full of the best American artists. And within 3 days, we, no surprise, been able to nail down all these very positive bilateral agreements. So that little box of, I got a couple left in there, always reminds me of our trip to Cuba. And we had a lot of books from different artists who we've worked with. And then over here, David Bell, this wonderful contemporary artist, this piece to me just felt perfect for this room. And this is a Clara Bauer. Clara Bauer is an artist from the Washington, D.C. area. She shows in many places and has a few murals around town. And she's my daughter. So you'll see a couple more pieces from Clara Bauer. And I have a very eclectic art collection, but what we've done here is we have combined the fresh and the contemporary with the older kind of crusty pieces, and it feels so good to me. We come in here and enjoy the fire at night and, have a little cocktail before dinner when we have guests and are entertaining, and enjoy that wash of light and that sound of a little activity outside. It's just what I think people look for when they decide to move to Old Town Alexandria. And some of the things in this house are just pieces I've picked up from my 20s on. I mean, literally, I lived here when I was single in my 20s, and there was this wonderful little shop called The Place Where Louis Dwells. And there was no provenance whatsoever on this painting. I just fell in love with it. So I don't really know much about it. Everybody always comments on it, and it's up in every house that I have. But I picked this up in my 20s, just in a little shop here in Old Town Alexandria. This piece was actually made by my daughter in high school. We love it so much. We have it here in our living room, and I find it terrific. Okay, so I got into politics because I had mono during Watergate. And I watched the Watergate hearings and fell in love with Howard Baker at the time. And I look at my whole life, and my whole life really has been about this idea of democracy. And I've always been attracted to Greek references. And so last year, with the Office of Art and Embassies, we opened a democracy exhibition that traveled through Europe at the Acropolis Museum. And so I already had this piece and several others that reference Greece. But, I think it's resonant for me, especially now when I think we're all unpacking whether we are moving toward the authentic ideals of democracy or whether some of them might be in peril. And so to have that as part of the decor throughout my house is just a nice reference for me. So there are 13 cantons in Switzerland, and if you go on an official visit to a canton, many times you will get
A cowbell. And the way I use this cowbell is when we're having a dinner party, it's time to go from a cocktail to the dinner table, I will let people know in a very subtle way with a cowbell. So you'll see these around the house. We're lousy with cowbells. Over here, we have another fun find. This was from a little brocante in Switzerland, and just I had it up in our home in Switzerland. So that reminds me of that, and it's great. They had a clock very much like this on the mantle in our living room, and I said, Bobbi Smith, the designer I worked with, was helping me source some of these pieces for this house, and I said, she came to Switzerland, and I said, I want to find a clock just like that. So everywhere we looked, it was an arm and a leg, and then in some cases even more, to get such a clock. And then one time we were in Easton, Maryland, and we walked in somewhere and really got it for a song. And I'm sorry about that, Easton Antique Store vendor. But I still think of Switzerland when I look at the mantle because we had a piece very similar to this. Then, of course, this French mirror. So all of that kind of are subtle references to our European experience. It was 4 years. It made an imprint on our lives. And it's just really nice to remember it with the surroundings in this pretty room. I want this house to be fun. And so, I didn't want to have a real serious chandelier in this room. And my designer, Bobbi Smith, came up with this terrific piece by a Mexican artist. And it's a play on a very kind of traditional chandelier, but it's made all out of tin that's painted white. And it is just so fun and yet very appropriate for this room. So when I was living in Switzerland, Bobbi Smith, my very good friend, was coming to visit, and she completely transformed the house. I was only home on Easter break when we bought the house, and I just turned the keys over to Bobbi, and I said, plan a trip. You're going to come, and we're going to buy some antiques in Switzerland, and you get started on making this house light and bright. And what she did was so far beyond my imagination. And as she was going along, she did call me, and I trust her completely, but she said to me, Megan, what would you think about painting these floors? And I had all these historic homes before, and I'd never done anything to them because I felt like I was just the current steward of these lovely old homes. But I have to admit, all of the houses felt very dark. And in Switzerland, I saw people with 800-year-old houses, and you'd walk in and they'd be fresh and contemporary and light. And so I was more open to it, but I said, well, maybe the vestibule. And then she called back and said, well, Megan, then it makes the hall look so dark. Maybe the hall. I said, well, maybe the hall. And then the phone call stopped. And then I came to visit, and I walked in the house. And as you could see, the whole house had been painted. And it was just perfection. I mean, I felt that it was just absolutely what I wanted. It reminded me so much of the houses in Europe where they were fresh and contemporary. And even if they had many antiques, there was just a feeling that it was a home of today, that living in an old home doesn't mean you have to live as they did when the house was built. So this is the hallway you come down when you enter the house, and you'll notice it is very, small, very narrow. But with the way that my designer taught me into these floors, you get light reflected from this very narrow pathway. And I love the design she's chosen for it. And in fact, the painter has done work in the White House
the State Department and other places in Washington does a superb job. These two paintings are from friends in Switzerland. This one of the Matterhorn. This one from a friend who does helicopter skiing. And sent us that, and we're still in touch with both of these friends. So we like to remember them. And then this is another side entrance from the garden. Over here is a note I got from Shepard Fairey, who is a street artist. He actually started as a street artist. A lot of people know his work from the famous Hope poster, and I got to know him during the Obama campaign. And so for the 60th anniversary of the Ich bin ein Berliner speech in Berlin, I called up Shepard and I said, Shepard, could you give a gift to the nation of a commissioned portrait of Kennedy? And this portrait of Kennedy was a gift by Shepard Fairey that is now hanging in the U.S. Embassy in Berlin. And he wrote me a little note thanking me. And that's to tell you how generous the artists of America are. And he's also given rights for this image to the Kennedy Library. So that's a great gift by Shepard Fairey. This is a little gift I got from the wife of the ambassador from China. And it was a piece that celebrates Chinese New Year. In this little area, we had planned to put wallpaper. And I had a big event coming up right after we moved into the house. And Bobbi Smith, my designer, had this great idea. She found this set of 4 antique colored prints. And they're castles in Germany and very reminiscent of the castles that are all over the German part of Switzerland. But she did faux painting, this faux chair rail that echoes these frames. And I liked it so much, I said, Bobbi, forget the wallpaper. I love it. So we ended up doing wallpaper in our little papa room. And I'll show that to you now. It is the only room with kind of moody looks. So please come on in. It is a very small powder room, but it packs a punch, I think, with this beautiful setting that kind of reminds me of the horse country in Virginia. So that's a nice Virginia reference. And then I have a portrait of General Grant, because I'm from Alexandria, Virginia, which is the hometown of Lee, and grew up with the story of General Lee. And I read the book General Lee and Me, and it was by another Alexandrian about the history of the Civil War and about Lee. And I closed the book and thought, I need a portrait of Grant. And then we have a few other paintings in here, very large scale oil painting, which would be counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people. But I love it. I love the fact that it's got this great scale, and it's always a surprise when people come in here. I get comments on it all the time. Anyway, I love this bathroom. It is very different from the rest of the first floor. I say it's the only masculine room in the house. And men always comment on it. And we've got these an old mirror that I kind of collected, and this light fixture, and it's a real atmosphere for a tiny little space like that. So it's lots of fun. So now we're coming into the dining room, which you'll see more architectural elements. And again, the Greek references. This fireplace, we replaced what was here, and my designer found this in Georgetown, and I thought she was going to paint it. And then she said, oh, no. And I love this rustic look, and it really kind of harkens back to what this house has been through, and it's just so very authentic. And then this piece is the laurels, and it symbolizes victory in a democracy. And so, in my house, because ever since the first year of our marriage, we've been running for some kind of office or helping someone else run for office. So we have all these photo ops that we have taken here with Hillary Clinton, and we did one with Pete Buttigieg and President Biden. And, so this is sort of our photo op place under the laurels with high hopes for wins. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't in a democracy. And we have another one of these kind of portraits, very similar to the one in the living room. We always have lots of flowers and plants in here. And again, you look out to my garden. You really kind of feel like it's a garden room where you're having your dinner. So I love it. And then these books and pieces here are also kind of reference points for our family, or like this is the grace my mother always told at the dinner table. I'm one of 6 kids, and it's written in her handwriting. So we'll pick it off the shelf and read it. And not that we've all memorized it, but it's nice to have a piece of mother when you're doing a family dinner. And my husband was the chair of the Space Committee, and people who collect what they used to call outsider art will recognize this as a Howard Finster, and it's on the theme of space. And so I gave it to Don when he was chairman of that committee, which he loved. This was a wonderful gift from Ambassador Oksana Makarova, who is the just recently departed from the United States ambassador from Ukraine. And it's a very traditional art piece of a scene of Kyiv in leather. And she was here the other night and gave us that as a gift. And then I have this set of Shakespeare, a full set of Shakespeare. I come from a very modest Irish family. My roots are Potato in Mayo County in Ireland. And yet, on my mother's side, from Mayo, where the potato famine hit the worst, and they were uneducated. Her uncle never finished high school, nor did he go to college. But if you go into all of these Shakespeare collections, you will see Uncle Hank's handwriting. And she said he was constantly quoting Shakespeare. And I love that there was that interest in our family for literature. And so that's there as a reference. We have Winston Churchill's collection of works. He famously said, when everybody after World War II said, imagine what the history books will say about us. And Winston said, I don't have to imagine, I'll be writing it. And he was right. He was the first to really, this collection, became the backbone of a lot of historical research. And he knew what he was doing when he did that. This is a photograph of my husband's grandfather, Otto Beyer. He was one of the New Dealers and worked for Roosevelt. And then I have this fun picture of a 1920s woman in a top hat because I just felt like she just, I don't know, spoke to me a little bit. So I have her up there. And this is a scene on the Appalachian Trail. So my husband has hiked over 2,000 miles and finished the Appalachian Trail. So I gave him this painting on a birthday recently. So, this room, like every room and like everybody and everybody's home, you end up realizing that it does say a lot about your life. So this is a French piece that we got, which I absolutely love. And that's just my designer found it and knew it would be perfect for this space. And I love the story behind this piece. The artist's name is Irving Gadsden, and he wasn't a very famous artist, although he had sculpture in front of the Corcoran, and that was integrated into the Corcoran collection, I was told by the antique dealer who sold me the piece. But what I love about it is that he was part of the color school in the 1960s. That was a school of abstract artists in Washington, D.C., that fed into the reason the Office of Art and Embassies was formed. President Kennedy saw abstract art as sort of a metaphor for the freedoms of democratic societies. When he was embroiled in that Cold War, he started this little office called Art and Embassies at the State Department. So every ambassador could curate art for their residences. And at that time, he was encouraging them to have abstract art to show that there are no bounds to expression in a free society. Because in East Berlin and places where there was communism around the world, artists were repressed. They could only do traditional art. They couldn't do abstract art. The governments were very threatened by it. So Kennedy was playing the subliminal soft power approach. And that was the office I ultimately ended up being director of. So I love having this in my house. I bought it way before I had the job. But it speaks to me on many different levels because of that. Well, I've always loved antiques, but I enjoy, it's sort of like my art collection. My curators at Art and Embassies were like, well, it is eclectic. Because I have historic things because I love history. I love, all my life I've been very keen on democracy and themes of democracy and art representing our democracy. And so that's why you see Greek elements. And but I like it to be contemporary as well. So it's eclectic, and a lot of these pieces mean a lot to me because of their provenance. So I think this house is like those houses we curated for, where a lot of the activity that's going on in the house, has to do with the work of the person living in the house, and that's the ambassador. And in the case of this house, this reflects my husband's work in politics and my work in diplomacy. People take many different lenses to the purchase of art, some of them even just an investment lens. I think you have to love it. Art can make you feel what someone can spend all day trying to make you understand. And so I would just tune into that. How does it make you feel? And then decide, is that something I can live with? So now we're stepping into the sunroom, the winter garden of our house. As you can see, it's all windows. It's like a jewel box of windows. And sometimes when we're entertaining in the spring or when the garden is at its peak, I'll move a table in here and we'll have our dinner party in here, crack open the windows and listen to the water coming down in the fountain. So it's really a magical place to either just sit around and enjoy our guests or have dinner. But this is my favorite piece in our house. So this painting is of Thomas Edgar Stevens. Now, he's an artist who came to the United States in around the 1930s from Europe, and he made 5 portraits of Lincoln to kind of show what kind of work he did. Well, guess who fell in love with his work? A guy who followed the Civil War very closely, President Eisenhower. And he ended up painting the Eisenhower portrait that is now in the National Portrait Gallery. He is an incredibly talented painter. And this is my favorite image of Abraham Lincoln. And his son inherited this painting. His son was an actor who played John Wilkes Booth twice on Broadway. He ended up giving it to one of the producers of one of those plays, and then I ended up getting it at auction after that. So I feel like it's a pretty direct provenance to the painter himself. And the reason the Eisenhower bit is so important to me is that when my family moved down from Scranton, Pennsylvania, my father had been in the Battle of the Bulge. His next-door neighbor was John Eisenhower, who was then writing a book, The Bitter Woods, on the Battle of the Bulge. They became very good friends, and he used to take my father to the White House to see President Eisenhower, and they would talk about the general's perspective on what was happening on the ground at the Battle of the Bulge, and then my father would provide what was actually happening on the ground at the Battle of the Bulge. So I'm very close to Susan Eisenhower even today, and I talked to her about this painting and this artist, and she said, Megan, we have 3 things that we fight about all the time in our family, and it's who's getting his paintings. We have 3 of those paintings, and we're always fighting over them. So they value their paintings as much as I value this painting, and I think he was such a great president, and so much of the work I've done throughout my life has been about trying to unite America and get closer to the promise and the aspirations of democracy. And I think what he did during his term was valiant and so important for the history of our nation. So I love having Lincoln join us for dinner when we do our little dinner parties in here. I have something very special that has to do with my husband's family. This desk was his grandfather's desk, and Don's grandfather was one of the New Dealers, as was his grandmother, who was the one who convinced Roosevelt to appoint the first woman on the cabinet, Frances Perkins, and Clara Beyer was her right-hand man, and she ended up being the first woman who was appointed to the International Labor Organization in Geneva. So she traveled all over the world as a representative of the ILO. But this desk was at their farm in Spring Hill, Virginia, and it is where much of the Social Security Act was written. And we have photographs of a lot of the New Dealers coming to the farm on the weekends, and they were hashing out how do we create the safety net for Americans. And so we just treasured this desk, and we just recently had it restored. But, I just think that's so cool that it's this piece of history. And around the house, we have a few gifts from Justice Brandeis to Don's grandparents and Felix Frankfurter and, all those names that we know from the New Deal. They were just contemporaries of Don's grandparents. So I just treasure this desk. So this is a pretty dark piece, but we've kept it very light and airy in here. Just because that's kind of the vibe with all the windows. And in the summertime, we crack open a window and we can hear the water coming from the fountain. But we also spend our Christmases in this room. This is where we open all of our gifts. And this year, I got the best gift. My daughter is an artist, and she asked me what I wanted. And I said, well, I love the sunroom. Maybe you could do a painting or a sketch of the sunroom for me. And this is what she gave me. It's an abstract piece of art because it plays with scale. And while it does have an image of the room, if you look and get in a little closer, you can see that she has incorporated some symbols and references to me and our relationship. We had just been to the Art Basel down in Miami, and we'd shared a bathroom. So she has my hairspray, she has my jewelry, and she has a little bunny, which is a reference to the fact that I used to call my children my bunny girls because they were both born on April 10th, and it's often right on Easter. So I just think this is such an inspired interpretation of this room, and it's really the most favorite gift I've ever received. When we returned from Switzerland, President Obama was interested in having me run the office of, it was actually the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. That has since been eliminated. But it was a fantastic program started by President Reagan, and it was populated by artists of every discipline and advocates for the arts. And it had a portfolio of doing anything from cultural diplomacy to art in the schools. And so for the second Obama term, I was involved in a wonderful arts education program. I did a lot with visual art. I did a lot with performing arts. And so I had, they saw that I was able to do so much with that in Switzerland that they gave me the opportunity to do that at the White House. We also led the cultural mission to Cuba when President Obama announced that we would extend the hand of friendship to Cuba. 1 month later, I arrived with Usher, Smokey Robinson, Dave Matthews, Cal Penn, Alfre Woodard, so many fantastic artists from the United States, and did the same thing, reminded the Cuban people of the who we are that is expressed through our arts sector. And I'm happy to say we were the first delegation to come back with agreed upon bilateral agreements, government to government, with the government of Cuba. I didn't choose my path. My path chose me in just about every instance. So we were surprised. We were working very hard in politics. My life professionally had been journalism and politics. And then I married a guy in politics, and I started doing a little more politics, but I was still doing the journalism, doing feature work. And then we ended up, when Don lost his race for governor, we got very involved in presidential politics. And then we got this opportunity to do cultural diplomacy in my case. And that's when I really realized that I'd done a lot of theater in college. I'd taken a lot of art courses. And when we got to Switzerland, you just sort of look inside yourself and think, how can I contribute? And I talked to the First Lady about it. She had done the same sort of thing at the White House. And, I thought, well, this I know I can do, and I can do it well. So I just kind of started doing events with artists and aligning our embassy with American artists. The Montreux Jazz Festival is practically all American artists. They have statues for Aretha Franklin, for B.B. King. I mean, it really is, in Switzerland, almost better public diplomacy representation for the United States than our own embassy. And so they were celebrating us anyway, and I brought that celebration to our embassy. When I got home, then it just sort of morphed into, the president saying, I'd love you to run this committee. Then after the president left and a new administration came in, I started consulting. I did a job for Ken Burns. We created the Levine Ken Burns Prize for History Documentary Filmmaking, which is now every year bestowed at the Library of Congress. So that was one of my projects. I worked with the American Film Institute, helping them to celebrate their 50th anniversary here in Washington, where they had made it possible to preserve all the old films from Hollywood through the Library of Congress. And then when it came time for this administration, of course, during COVID, I was working very hard on the Biden campaign, and it just seemed natural for them to put me in the role of art and embassies because of both my diplomatic experience and my experience in the arts. So this room was a real challenge, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But we had these shelves here, and my designer saw these great linen curtains, which I just love. And she had already decided we were going to go with black and white because we decided to keep these granite counters. But in here, we just thought we'll put all of the crystal and some of the chai. Actually, the good chai is in another closet. But it does encourage me to use my crystal every day, which I love to do because I'm from this very humble Irish family. And even when we would go visit our relatives in Scranton, Pennsylvania, my maiden aunts would have the table resplendent in Waterford crystal because that is very Irish. And so I have some of my grandmother's pieces and my mother's pieces. And every time I pick up one of those nice Waterford doublets, I think of that family heritage of ours. And I took it to Switzerland when we went. It's just so much a part of our family tradition is using the crystal and the china and the silver and, maybe it's sort of an aspirational lifestyle that I grew up on. And I think it just makes every day a little bit nicer. Over here, we have this funny little, I call him my colonist, and it's sort of my ode to Old Town. And I just picked him up in one of the old antique shops. Actually, I think Bobbi found him. And we just thought we'd put a man in the kitchen. And so he's our colonial reference. And I have my little coffee station over here. But the traditional, my mother used to say, every house has to have a silver set. So you have to have your silver set up. And it's just a very simple kitchen. It's not a large kitchen. And I like the fact that it's separate from the dining room. And that's the way we do it. I have no problem with, I don't need to make this a larger place. It's perfectly functional. And there's some pieces here that are kind of fun for the family. This was another Clara Bauer, like the ones you've seen in other places in the house. She did a watercolor of the house we have on the Eastern Shore. And this is where we spend a lot of our holidays. Our Thanksgiving is spent as a family in Oxford. So this image means a lot to our family. And then this is a fun piece I found of an automobile. It looks like it's turn of the century Ford. And my husband's family was in the car business. And so it's just sort of a funny reference to the car business. And over here is a collection of like a pewter tea set. It was given as a gift to Don's grandparents by Justice Brandeis. So there are all these references to political history. We've got Potomac fever. We live in the Washington area. And so it's a part of who we are and what surrounds us. All right, let's head upstairs. We use the back kitchen stairs. I call it the stairway to heaven. So this is our guest room, and it's small, but I just think it's so sweet and just kind of a little cozy nook. One of my smart aleck daughters had this made because my husband was for Pete Buttigieg, and I was for Joe Biden, and then
Joe Biden won. So this is my Christmas present that year. So it's a little funny. This was going to be my daughter's bedroom, and that's a little piece of Grace Kelly's image, and my daughter's name is Grace. So I leave it in here for that reason. This is an old piece that we refurbished, and this is a bed I got in Old Town Alexandria. This is a piece that was my grandfather's, and we just put the ticking on it, and above it is a piece from Switzerland of just another castle. They're all over the place in the German part of Switzerland. So, and the French part, actually. And so it's small, but it's so sweet with all of his little kind of touches of character. And it's got a nice ensuite bathroom. So I feel like our guests are well taken care of, even though it is a little small, but that's life in Old Town. So this room we actually call the puzzle room because we use it for puzzles more than anything else, but it's also kind of a library for us. And we got this big old table in Switzerland at a Brocante. These are 2 chairs that we got from the Fannin family, which is a big Alexandria family. Duchy Fannin sold them. They were getting rid of beautiful old pieces that they had. And then this is a painting that I picked up in Easton, Maryland. And it's a scene, again, from the Appalachian Trail, because my husband's hiked the whole thing. And this is a very typical scene. So we love this room. It's where at night we come and, do the puzzle. No TV in here. It's all about the puzzle. And we've had just really nice nights in here. We love it. And on the wall, we have, that's burlap. I was looking at a lot of grass cloth, and it just seemed, I wanted something rougher and more authentic. And it was Bobbi who came up with, Bobbi Smith, my designer, came up with this idea of just getting burlap and putting it on panels and installing it. And I just really love it. I love the color. I love everything about it, and the texture in particular. So we try not to put too many political pictures up, but I loved working for President Obama. And this is a picture of us together next to a wood print of the capital of Switzerland, Bern, which is where we served for 4 years. And we're so grateful for him, both for that opportunity and the opportunity to run the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. Above, you'll see photographs of my mother's and father's wedding, but my mother's bridal gown and her bridesmaids. And this is my mother's wedding. This is, not too far off the boat, and is Scranton, Pennsylvania. And then behind, you see the photographs of my father as an infant, where they were dressing in what looked like in the Victorian times, the poor boys were dressed like girls until they grew up. This is my father again, looking like a little girl. But it's fun to have, some of that family history in this room, which is kind of our family room. So this used to be a closet, and I am so thrilled we took the door off, so we're getting the light. There was a window in the closet, and we turned it into our little coffee bar. So my husband and I get up in the morning, the first thing we do is make a little espresso, and I love the Nespresso because it was I who told the CEO of Nestle in Switzerland that he needed to open little Nespresso shops and that they would do very well. And during the course of our term, he said I was proven correct. And he gave me a little Nespresso machine that I actually left in Switzerland. But I did buy this one as soon as I got here because it's such good coffee, I have to say. And so this has worked very well. I have a little closet over here. And Bobbi's idea, Bobbi Smith, the designer, came up with the faux painting and this woodwork, and it's really just been painted. It was a very easy project to do. And this is right above the living room, and it's just like the living room in it. We have all these windows in our bedroom, which I just think is so much fun. And, you wake up in the morning and you get a view of the city, which I find beautiful. I actually see a lot of trees. So we painted it this very cool green. We have a very kind of serene painting over the couch. And this is a desk, my mother's desk. And so I remember maybe I chiseled that in. Though I mean, it's not in perfect condition, but that's just the way I like it. Lots of memories with this desk of my mother's, and then this wonderful lounge chair with the snark pillow for my children, who have such a sense of humor. And I am never able to fall asleep anywhere. I'm just not the type. But with this lounge chair, if I sit down and read a book, I'm out like a light. So it gives me a chance to relax. I sit here and take my notes and try to figure out what I'm doing, what's next on the agenda. And it's very comfortable. It's just what a bedroom should be. It is a bit of a place to escape. Well, overall, what I love about my home is the light. It has a sense of fun, and it doesn't take itself too serious. This house isn't that way. This house is a little iconoclastic, and we have a lot of fun here. We just had a big party last night, and I think it is an environment that is ready for the kinds of things I want to be doing in the next 20 years, which is entertaining a lot. I like a lot of light and things outside in the garden. So it's just the place I want to be right now. Well, I mean, last night I always get a reaction because people, I think, come up to this federal house and, they know there's going to be something going on in there. They don't expect what they see when they open the door. And because I think it's just a bright, happy, and not very traditional feel when you walk in. Poor Bobbi, I wish you were here because it's really a lot about her design, and then she, in helping pick out some of the art and some of the furniture, kind of gave me the confidence to just pick what made me feel good, and rather than feeling confined by simply history. Well, home is family. Home is friendship. Home is refuge. Home is the interior life in every possible way.
Thanks for watching. Go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content and shopping guides.